We are now joined by Dr. Greg Q, an occupational medicine specialist, and the topic that he discussed here at the Saiosh conference has to do with the use of cannabis and the options available to employers in this regard so that we can manage risk accordingly. Thank you, Dr. Q.
Pleasure.
So just a few questions based on the information that you shared with us today. What are the most significant challenges employers face in addressing cannabis use in the workplace, and how can they balance employee privacy with workplace safety concerns?
Yeah. Well, exactly. I think their biggest challenge is that balance. The idea of addressing the risks of substances such as cannabis and other medications or drugs or the like that can affect that can impact thinking or impair thinking has been around a long time. So they've pretty much got a fairly good handle on the idea of screening, acting on a screen, who should be screened and the like. But I think the difficulty is in balancing the rights of individuals versus the duties of the employer, and how exactly to make that balance work for both parties. Partly because employer situations vary. You get some employers where there is a very real safety risk, mining operations, quarry operations, construction work, big petrochemical plants. Safety is a big issue there. But then there are also circumstances where these are office admin employees, these are other circumstances like banks, where it may not be a safety issue, but there's certainly an importance on employee performance, cognitive performance. So under all those varying circumstances, how do they position themselves to be both fair and at the same time fulfill their mandate as an employer? It can be quite a tricky balancing act.
I see.
Yeah.
Can you discuss some of the current state of cannabis testing methods and their limitations in determining impairment?
Yeah, great question. That's exactly it. So the traditional technique is to use urine, and remains the benchmark is to use urine as your test sample. It's well understood, and we've got inexpensive and fairly reliable test kits for that. So that would be your first port of call. It's a screener for the presence of a metabolite in the urine.
Right.
And the important thing about that is that metabolite is not psychoactive at all. So you're testing for the presence of a substance which has no impact at all on the person's performance. But it tells you, it's a tracer essentially, that the person is a user of cannabis. And it could be someone who used it 3 weeks before, up to 30 days before. And the tracer might still be there. So that's the standard mechanism. The one that's becoming increasingly adopted is the oral fluid. We use that term oral fluid, not saliva, because the oral fluid is not just saliva, it's a mixture of other fluids generated in the mouth. And that is the other mechanism which is now increasingly taking hold. It's very unusual, although not impossible, for blood to be used. In the workplace, we don't generally like using blood for drugs at all, and for cannabis as well. But it certainly is a possibility, and particularly now with changes in the National Road Traffic Act, for which a blood test has now been given as a mechanism for testing in terms of the National Road Traffic Act.
Like they do with alcohol as well.
Exactly the same mechanism of alcohol. So you can screen for alcohol, and then a blood test for alcohol, screen for cannabis, blood test for cannabis.
Okay. So what considerations should employer then look at if they want to develop and implement a cannabis control or cannabis policy for their workplace?
Yeah, exactly. I think to go back to basics, the 5 steps that we are reminded of by the World Health Organization. Step 1, do you need a policy at all, and why? Or at least if within the policy you are including screening as part of your policy, then why? Is there a justified reason for that? And if there is one, then that's fine. Then have a policy that's fair. Write it up, attention to detail, record the policy, and then step 3 is communicate it to everyone. So everyone knows it, and make sure that people understand it and have an opportunity to at least have something to say about it. And then from then, the next step is to make sure that people who might have a problem with cannabis have an opportunity to be referred for help. Same as for alcohol as well. And then the final thing, then to go ahead and implement your program.
Okay. Then the last question I've got for you, looking ahead, what emerging trends or research or technologies do you see impacting the management of cannabis for the future for employers? And naturally, if we look at policy documentation and development as well.
Yeah, very good. So part of the research is to try to get a better handle on levels of cannabis and the degree of impairment. We seem to have fairly good understanding of levels of alcohol in the blood and degree of impairment. Several studies have been done measuring impairment as a consequence of cannabis. And thresholds have been developed, which is why we have the value for the National Road Traffic Act. By the way, similar values are adopted in many jurisdictions around the world on the grounds that there are values above which impairment is likely to be present. But there's still some argument around this. Perhaps continued research there. And then the other research is in really making sure that our oral fluid test kits are reliable and dependable, because these can be life-changing things for employees if the test is falsely positive, and the employer acts on that with the possibility that the test was wrong. So reliable, good screening tests, and perhaps better still, reliable and inexpensive confirmatory tests for oral fluid.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. It's really an interesting topic, and I enjoyed having a conversation with you.
Thank you, Orchid. It was great being here.